It's no secret that 2016 is shaping up to be one historic election season in a number of ways. Candidates from both sides of the aisle have built a campaign on an anti establishment sentiment. Political outsiders Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders supporters are of the most loyal and fierce, showing just how common political resentment is among Americans. Trump and Sanders' popularity in many ways is unprecedented. But the idea of populism, although it has evolved, is nothing new. Joining us now to talk about populism is attorney James Goodnow. Welcome back.
Hey, Danielle, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. How would you describe today's populism?
The populism we see today is very much a protest populism. You have people, the common people of the country, saying we have a group of elites who have taken over the system. They've hijacked the system and we need to take it back. And so I think very much it is that anti-establishment, anti-elite message that has defined populism over the course of history.
Yeah, it seems to be more of an impulse and an ideology in a lot of ways, especially compared to in the past.
Absolutely. And I think what you're seeing here is really two forms of populism developing. On the one hand, you have what I would call economic populism. And this is the classic populism you're used to hearing about. You see that from Bernie Sanders. We need to have centralized government. We need to have more public institutions, higher education. This is a page straight out of the playbook of the classic populist movement, which actually dates back to the 1890s. Trump, on the other hand, has a very different brand of populism. I would call it personality populism because it's driven less by ideology and more by his persona. I'm strong, others are weak. Marco Rubio is the sweater that no one will take seriously. Ted Cruz is pathetic. Hillary Clinton's spineless. Every single adjective to describe others is that of weakness or various synonyms of that. So people who've been out of the system for a long time are attracted to that type of bravado. It's almost analogous to in Latin America, you hear of the machismo and the leadership. Well, we call this Trumpismo. And I think that's really Donald Trump's unique brand of populism.
He certainly seems to appeal more to the older, sort of nostalgic voters who miss those good old days when they didn't fear terrorism, which I think is why Trump appeals to those blue-collar Democrats.
I think that's right. It's his entire campaign slogan, Make America Great Again. Now, in some ways, I think he's hearkening back to an era that never really existed. It's nice to say that the good old days were so great, but we know that they really weren't. But you're right. What Donald Trump has done very effectively is to appeal to people who have not been in the system for a long time or perhaps ever. They have stopped voting. They've opted out because they've been so disgusted, frankly, with the system. And he has managed to capture all of them across the board. And I think that's why you see the widespread support for him now, at least in the primary.
Now, populism has been around for a really long time, but it's emerging on both the left and the right simultaneously. Have we ever seen anything like this?
It's interesting, Danielle. Populism itself is nothing new, as you point out. It's been around for a long time, and typically in every election, you do see at least one populist candidate. If you go back to 1992 with Ross Perot, and again in 96, and also 96 with Ralph Nader, you see these sorts of populist sentiments in the campaign cycle, but it's with a third party. What's really unique about this is you have populist candidates on the left and the right emerging at the exact same time. The question, of course, is why is this happening? No one knows for sure, but in my mind, it's no surprise that we're seeing this on the heels of one of the most turbulent economic decades we've had, going all the way back to 2008. People have been upset about the fact that we're not rebounding as quickly as we would like to, and now the electorate is ready for a change, and that's why this populism is so effective.
And we're seeing it on both sides, as we were just talking about. Do you think this calls into question the importance of even having a left and a right side?
It's a good question, Danielle. I think what you're going to see, however, is that these strong populist movements on the left and the right are going to move toward the center. So critics would say, no, no, no. See, this populism right now shows that a two-party system is bad. We simply have too many divergent views to jam into these two parties, and that's an inherent flaw. But I think the opponents would come in and say, no, over the long haul, the two-party system promotes centrism. And that's exactly what we're going to see as we go to the general election. In fact, Donald Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, said he's now going to be a new Donald Trump, the new presidential Donald Trump we've heard so much about. I don't know when he's actually going to appear, but apparently he's coming. And I think he has to come. It's one thing to try and rally the base in the context of a primary. It's another to win a general election without being more centrist. So my prediction is some of this rhetoric will calm down.
Now, we're seeing a lot, especially lately, Trump trying to appeal to Sanders voters. Do you think that if Sanders doesn't make it, do you think some of his voters would actually be in support of Trump?
I think it's possible, Danielle, that you may have a small group of Bernie Sanders voters that moves to Donald Trump. Overall, I'd say probably not, though, less likely. Bernie Sanders has really appealed to younger people, the millennials. They've been moved by his economic message. That message is very different and very distinct from the anti-establishment message of strength that Donald Trump is trumpeting right now. So overall, I think there may be success in pulling a few over, but I don't see that happening on a large scale.
Now, if either candidate does secure the nomination or even makes it into the White House, what effect do you think this would have on American politics?
I think what we're going to see is that the legacy of Bernie Sanders and the legacy of Donald Trump will be an enduring one. Certainly, although Bernie Sanders appears to be all but knocked out of the election thus far, Hillary Clinton has adopted some of his populist messages into her platform. Same with Donald Trump. Right now, even though he may pull to the center, he's still going to be Donald Trump. He still is going to appeal to that new class of voters. So I do think you're going to see new discourse taking place, which is happening right now. And I think you're going to see a movement in that populist direction, even though it will be a scaled back version of what we see now.
It's interesting, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are polar opposites, but they do have that common thread. Some would say Sanders sort of made Clinton step up her game while Trump lowered the standards for the Republican Party.
Yeah, it's a great point, Danielle. A lot of people have said, oh, Hillary, she can't survive this terrible, this challenging primary that she's gone through. But I think the answer is it's actually the opposite of that. Because of Bernie Sanders' involvement, Hillary has had to be sharper. She's had to practice, and that's going to get her ready for the general election. On the other hand, you have Trump, who had so many competitors that this populist message really, at least according to some, devolved to a point where it was at this very base level. Trump good, others bad. And so now, as we go into the general election, although we have two populist messages, it's going to be interesting to see how they evolve over the course of the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, Trump and Sanders have certainly done a great job of capturing political resentment and translating it into a language that speaks to many Americans. Attorney James Goodnow, thanks so much for coming on with us and talking politics today.
Thanks, Danielle.